Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn even more money. All in one place, and it's for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup looks like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts, Q&A, and polls has let us be creative on a whole other level. I highly recommend you give it a try. So download Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Welcome to the X's and T podcast, where we talk about X's and T with your hosts, Corey
and Dani. Welcome back, everybody. It's been a week. I hope everybody had a nice...
For them, anyway.
Yeah. Hope everybody had a nice Independence Day and everybody was safe and we don't have any emergency room visits for any of our listeners.
Nobody losing any fingers.
Yeah. Hopefully
blowing up their houses.
Have all your digits in your houses.
Your home.
So last time we talked with you guys, we had went through kind of my part one, and where we left off was that Kyle went to prison and
where he belongs.
Yeah.
Forever. One day,
literally.
hopefully it'll be forever.
The sad part is, though, if he does go to prison forever, it's because he did something and
right.
It was really
he did something
bad.
more.
Way more. And I think somebody would lose their life at that point.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah, definitely.
Unfortunately.
So where we left off was Kyle went to prison. It's July of 2015 at this point. It was a lot. You know, one of the biggest things that kind of, I guess, kept me in this relationship was that I had the lesser of two evils, right? It was either I stay with Kyle or I go back to live with my mom.
Right.
Because at this point, I still don't really view living with my dad as an option. And my mother was a huge narcissist. She was very abusive. And I've really just throughout my life made all the wrong decisions just to get out of her house.
Right. Always trying to run away from that situation.
Yeah. And of course, always ending back there because the decisions I was making was not good.
Right.
One of the things that I was always taught was the only way you're going to get out of here is if you get a boyfriend or a husband. I mean, that's why I got married when I was 18 years old because, you know, I dropped out of high school and I just couldn't live with my mom anymore. I could not do it. It was so traumatic. It was very difficult. And at that time, the only thing that I knew that I could do to get out was to get married.
Right.
Because I hadn't even seen joining the military as an option because she just never had a vision for my future. I was not forced to go to high school. I was not forced to go to school at all.
She just didn't care what you did.
No, she didn't. I mean, there was no need for me to sneak out because she just didn't care. And she knew all of this stuff and enabled a lot of it. So it was everything in my power I was doing to try to get away from her. And unfortunately, I did have to end up going back because literally the next day after he was sentenced, he would be transported to the intake prison, which is also a women's prison as well. So that's where they do the men intake, and then he would be transferred from there out to whatever prison in Oregon he would go to.
Got it.
And the very next day, I packed up my car and I left Kyle's parents, where I had been staying for the last month, and I had to go back to my mom's. And it was sad because at that point I was still very close with Kyle's parents and I didn't want to go home.
Yeah.
But
they don't want to go back to that situation.
Yeah.
It's the lesser of two evils, I guess.
Exactly. So it was really hard being back home. I had actually ended up going out with some friends literally the night after I got home because it was my old friend's 21st birthday. And it was hard. It was very hard to kind of transition back into regular life because I mean, life wasn't normal for me anymore.
Right.
My significant other had been ripped away from me. It was not this, like, I was
breakup,
so
to speak.
It wasn't a breakup. He was very much ripped away from me, and that's how I felt. And trying to go back to regular life just felt weird.
Yeah, I bet.
So I went out with these friends. That was a weird night. But after that, it was just trying to find a job. And actually within 2 weeks of being home, I did find a job. It was my first office job, and I started working, kind of an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday type of job, and it was great. I loved the schedule, and that's, I think, when I knew that's the industry for me.
Right.
So it was just normal, I guess. But the downfall is that my mom and I fought a lot. It was like going back to the same shit when I was a kid.
Right.
So
only now you're an adult.
Yeah, I'm an adult.
You have a child of your own.
Yeah. And my kid was going to daycare at the time, and we would just be home on weekends. And I mean, it's hard to say what we started arguing about, but there's one time in particular when I had just gotten home. I want to say I had just started working. I was home for maybe about a month at this point and working for maybe about 2 weeks. And my mom, when she gets angry, she says the worst possible things that you could say to a person. And this one time in particular, it was still summertime. It was like the end of summer, like August, end of August. Basically, through our arguments, she had told me that I deserved what I got from Kyle.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Yep. So I kind of went off the deep end, like way off the deep end.
Wow.
I grabbed my keys and I left. I left my son behind. I know that was not the right decision to make at the time, but I don't know. It was not okay. So I had every intention of unaliving myself that day. I was not going to come home. I felt like my kid was going to be better off because if anything happened to me, my kid would just go to my dad.
Right.
Whether I liked it or not. I wasn't very close with my dad at this point, but he was always there for my kid and myself. So I always just knew.
Better than being with your mom.
Yeah. So I know my dad would have fought for him. If anything ever happened to me, my dad is the one who's going to get my children.
Right.
But at that time, I know that my dad would have fought for my kid. He would not have gone back to his biological father. We hadn't seen his biological father at that point in like 3 years.
Yeah, he wouldn't know what to do.
Exactly. So I'm driving, right? I have this plan and I go up to Mount Hood. Mount Hood was just a comfortable place for me. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because, that's a lot, but
right.
I'm just hysterical and I'm planning like, okay, I know everything's going to be okay. And I'm just kind of coping with the fact that these could be my last moments. And something told me to turn on the radio. I had 6 CDs in my CD player that just kind of rotated because my car at the time had a 6 CD player rotation.
Right.
And
you're fancy.
Yeah. Well, it was a 2002 Honda CR-V that I was driving. So maybe fancy for the time.
Right.
But it was definitely not new because this is 2015.
Right.
But I remember this moment when I turned on the radio and I like tear up every time I think about it. But the song Sinners Like Me by Eric Church was playing. And I don't know what it is about that song, but something about it, like, I don't know. It kind of makes you feel like
it's your comfort song.
It is. It's like you're getting wrapped up in a hug and you're being told like you're not alone. You're going to be okay.
Right.
That song, like I lost it. I lost it because I realized that there's nobody here that can care for my children like I do. And something has to change. So I still ended up driving up to this spot that not very many people know about, at least that I know of. And I actually just fell asleep. So I slept up there. And when I woke up, I felt this weird sense of peace. And I drove home, and of course I had to make amends with my mother.
Right.
She ended up being like, she was okay with the fact that I left. She knew it was kind of better for both of us for me to leave, but
it probably would have been a lot worse if you hadn't left.
Exactly. So I went home and we just tried to make the best of the situation. It didn't by any means get better with her though.
Right.
I knew from that moment on that I needed to be here for my child. So I continued working, and Kyle and I at this point we're talking on the phone. His mom would put money on his phone and he would call me and we would write letters back and forth. But I was still in this weird place of like, I don't think I want to be with you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You're in prison. You're going to be in prison for the next 3 years. Am I supposed to put my life on hold?
Right. That's not fair to you.
No. So probably around September is when I broke up with him.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much.
Right.
And he would still call me after that, but ultimately he would probably, I think, stop calling me because he called on holidays. But I started dating someone, I want to say in December of 2015. At least I think that's when it was. I feel bad. His name was Luke. We'll call him Luke. And Luke, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry. This relationship, dude, was so bad. And it was bad because this guy was not meant to be with a single mom.
Right.
Because my life and where I'm at in my life, especially at this point, is I am traumatized. I still, at this point, none of my family believes me about my mom except for my dad. And everybody in my family hated my dad because...
But your dad went through it too, so he understood.
Oh, exactly. So, like, no, I still don't even have an understanding of what my mom's going through at this point yet. And I'm still trying to feel heard. I haven't gone to therapy at this point because of Kyle either, because I never wanted to be portrayed as a victim.
Right.
Because I never felt like it. And I just kind of denied it. I was like, no, I'm not a victim. There are victims out there, but it's not me.
I felt like that for a long time, too.
Yeah.
Like, I could have had it worse, you know?
Exactly. I always felt that. But, you know, obviously looking back, I know I had it pretty fucked up.
Right.
Like, that was a fucked up situation that both of us went through.
Right. Mine was always like, he didn't hit me, so it's not bad.
Yeah.
It's not abuse. He didn't hit me.
Right. I hope you see now that it definitely was.
I have different views now. Yeah. For sure.
But when you're going through it, it's so challenging. So I'm trying to be in this relationship with this person that I knew from elementary school. We reconnected and we actually ended up going shooting. Surprisingly enough, that was kind of our first, like, I guess, date. Yeah. But it was just us hanging out as friends. And then very, very quickly, it escalated from there. And I was hanging out a lot with my friends, that one who would end up becoming my roommate later on, and then this guy that I had been friends with since 8th grade. I mean, this guy was truly my best friend, and I have so much regret with how traumatized I was and like how I treated him. Right. He and I still talk. We're not nearly as close as we were, but if you're listening, you know who you are, and I am so sorry. Like, I don't think there's ever an apology in the world that will be big enough for how I treated these people at this time, because I was really fucked up. And
you're going through a lot.
Yeah. So December hits, I begin this relationship, and I'm not by any means ready for it. No. But I entered...
Just trying to fill a void, so to speak.
It was to fill a void.
Yeah.
It was to fill a void, and I guess I wanted to prove to myself that I could be with somebody other than Kyle.
Right.
But it was all wrong timing. And we continued...
You had to take time to heal first, for sure.
I didn't do that. So it was really hard, you know, to try to maintain this relationship and a job, and then, you know, my really just narcissistic, verbally abusive mother. So my life at this time was kind of in shambles, but I was trying to get by. So by May of 2016, I kind of ran into this old friend of mine from middle school, and he basically got me involved in a cult. It was a multi-level marketing type cult, and it was a lot, and it consumed my life for the 3 years that, you know, Kyle would be in prison, because I was lost. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I did not at all want to be in the job that I had, because it was such a toxic environment. I'm telling you, we should do a whole episode based on the jobs that I've had.
Literally.
Because this one was the CEO was dating my boss.
Oh. Yeah.
And I worked with my boss's daughter at this point.
That's awkward.
And it was, oh my gosh.
What a shit show.
It was a shit show. Oh my word, was it a shit show. And so I just knew that I didn't want to do that, but I was too scared to go to college, because I've always been scared to go to school because I'm bad at math. And I feel like math is the one thing that would tear me down. So I didn't want to go to school, but I knew I wanted to do something.
Math is hard, man.
It is.
That was my worst grade when I went. I got a C.
Me too. Well, I mean, that's a class I intentionally didn't go to, and that would catapult me into dropping out of high school.
This was like when I went to college for my veterinary assistant stuff.
Yeah.
Because I had to do math there, too. And surprisingly, that was my worst grade was a C. And I was like, wow, we're doing something right, at least, I guess.
And how much math are you using with the animals, by the way?
Well, quite a bit, because you do dosages and stuff for medication.
I was really hoping you'd say none.
Sorry to disappoint.
Damn. So
you have to calculate medication dosages and stuff a lot. So
Damn. All right. Well, math is necessary, but I didn't want to do it.
But you got a calculator.
That's true. That's true. I have my phone. They told us in school, you have to do this without a calculator because you'll never just have a calculator on you. They lied. Shout out to you teachers from like the 90s and the early 2000s. I have a calculator on me 24/7.
24/7. They even have watches with calculators on them.
Yes,
so.
Exactly. So... But
suck on that.
Right, but I didn't want to go to school. I knew I wanted to make a difference, and this cult just seemed like that opportunity because it was a multi-level marketing.
Yeah, it seemed like a great idea at the time.
It really did. I remember my dad telling me, like, don't do that, and my stepmom being like, don't do that.
Right.
And I did end up getting sucked
into it.
Nobody
listens to their parents.
No, I sure as fuck did not, and I should have. I have so much regret for not listening to them, but I got sucked into this cult, and and it was really being in this cult that kind of, I guess, they they either make or break a relationship. I'll tell you that. And that's one of the things that they told us when we first started, because my boyfriend Luke at the time and I were going to these like meetings, these what they call quote business seminars. I can say that I took away some really, useful information as far as like how to interview well. That I can say I'm grateful for. Maybe some of the books that I've read too over the time, but otherwise it was just a big waste of time and a huge waste of money and really traumatic. Actually, I'm telling you, we should do a whole episode based on that too.
Man, I've heard some stories, guys,
and I have so many. I mean, 3 years
it's
worth.
Wild.
I continued through this time, was in this cult. I was full-fledged in it at this point, and my significant other and I were struggling because I had what I felt was a bigger vision for myself. And he was very much, I guess he just wanted to go a different route in life. He was not by any means a bad guy. I mean, he still to this day is probably one of the nicest people. Obviously, I haven't spoken to him in years.
Right.
So again, if you're listening, Luke, you know who you are, dude. I'm so sorry because I was so messed up and I was taking after my mom that I treated him so poorly, especially when we argued, because the only way that I knew how to argue was to jab with the meanest things that were possible for me to say, because that's how I was taught. That's how my mom argued. Right. I mean, it's the reason my parents are divorced.
Hit you at the knees.
Yeah, exactly. So ultimately, we would be together for a year. We would try to make it work, and it did not work. So through this time, Kyle and I are not talking at all, but I'm still seeing his parents. Ugh. I had visited Frank and Stacy so many times. In fact, they took me hunting for my birthday one year. It was my birthday in actually 2016. I would go up and go hunting. In fact, Luke would come up with me one time to go see Frank and Stacy, and we all went shooting.
Lucky they didn't shoot you.
They were okay with it. They just wanted to stay. They claimed they wanted to stay close to my son, as they, he had seen them as grandparents.
They don't know how to be grandparents.
Oh, they sure as fuck do
not. They
don't
even know how to be parents.
No. And actually, it was during this time, during that hunting trip, that's when they got a message from you. I was there with them during this time, and I remember
I don't think I talked about that shit.
Oh.
Oops.
So after you had been gone, right? You had sent this message. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I still have the message, so I will totally post it on Instagram so everybody can read it. But I sent a message to Stacy actually on October 20th, 2015 at 9:33 p.m. I'm looking right at it, so yeah, it was that's like how I'm able to tell you.
It was the weekend after my birthday, my 22nd birthday, that I had gone out there, and we were in Lowell.
Yeah, so I just sent her a message. It was like my last kind of, I guess,
like a last ditch effort.
Yeah, trying to see if I could reach out to somebody on his side of the family, because for a long time I always felt like it was something I did, like it was my fault that they didn't want to be around and involved in my child's life, and I had a lot of guilt about it, mostly just because I felt bad for my son. Like I felt like he deserved to have his other family be a part of his life. But I mean, obviously I know now, like that's not anything that I want him around, because they're not good people.
No, not at all.
I sent her a message, Stacy a message, basically just kind of like introducing their grandson to them, which is a weird thing to say, but he was 16 months old at the time, and they haven't seen him since he was at that point probably 4 or 5 weeks old. So basically that's all it was, and I sent him a picture, and I remember eventually she did read it, and I never got a reply. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, she was really kind of taken aback by it.
I bet.
I think the reason she didn't respond, or at least the reason she gave me, was that she really believed Kyle's lies, and that was not her grandson. Right. In fact, through this time, Stacy was carrying a picture of some different dude.
Dude, I don't think I talked about that in my second part either. God, I forgot so much.
So there was another person that Corey is friends with. I didn't know this person at all. I never met him. But Stacy would carry a picture of Kyle's son and this other guy.
We'll call him Steven.
Steven, yeah. Okay, so she'd carry this picture of Kyle and Corey's son and a picture of Steven and tell people, doesn't he look like this Steven guy instead? There's no way that that's my grandson. That was her justification for not responding to you.
This guy that she's literally never met in her whole entire life, she carries a picture of him around. Like, who the fuck
she found
does
him on
that?
Facebook. She found him on Facebook.
I just recently found out about this, and I literally was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It blew my mind.
Yeah. So she would carry this picture around, and she would basically just try to justify that that's not her grandson. That's somebody else's kid, and that you were this horrible cheater, and how dare you do all this stuff. And this is this they portrayed you as this horrible person. Right. And I feel like they continued it because they didn't want to believe how bad their son really was. So through this time, I got really close with Stacy and Frank, especially Frank, because Stacy would go to bed kind of early, and Frank was a raging alcoholic, like raging, like 18 pack of Keystone Light a day.
Or more.
And we would stay up late just talking. And I know now, obviously, he was so drunk, like our conversations were useless and meaningless.
Yeah, he didn't remember the next day for sure.
Well, I think he did. I mean, he was such a alcoholic for so many years that I think that
didn't affect him after a while.
Exactly. So we would talk, and I told him all the terrible things that his son had done to me. I showed him this red notebook that Kyle had that he would write down his fantasies about hurting me in this notebook. And Frank acted as if he was so appalled by this, and so much so that while I was with them, he never talked to Kyle on the phone ever. Kyle would call, he'd say, "Hey Kyle, I love you," and that would be it. He wouldn't say anything else to him. And Stacy said it was because Frank was so ashamed of what Kyle had done that he couldn't talk to him.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's my understanding. So it wasn't uncommon for me to be hanging out with them and go visit them for a weekend, and because they lived as if they were camping 24/7.
Right. Yeah.
They would live out in the woods. They lived on a family's property for a while. They lived on actually that family's property while I went hunting with them that time. They would eventually move off the property and just go live in the woods for a while in their camp trailer, and they would work in town. But outside of that, I was there all the time. So we fast forward, right? So at this point, we're 2016. We're in October. Fast forward to like December, and me and this dude are falling apart.
Right.
Me and Luke were just not doing well, and I've lost my best friend since I was in 8th grade. This guy that, he's a wonderful person. My parents love him. My parents always which is so funny to admit this out loud, but my parents wanted me to marry him. My dad was convinced this guy was like perfect, and we always had these inside jokes with him and my dad. So
it's funny because that's how my parents were with Steven.
Oh gosh, yeah. Okay.
Remember, my mom literally said that the other day.
She did.
She still says it to this day. I'm like, God,
my dad does too. So if you're listening, friend, I am so sorry. It's cringy, but my parents love him, and my dad still asks about him and stuff. But so I've lost my friend. Luke and I are just drowning, and I'm still involved in this cult. This cult is the only thing that's keeping me above water at this point as far as hope goes, not financially.
Yeah.
I'd found a new job, and in 2017 is when things kind of really changed, because at the end of 2016, my mom kicked my son and I out. We had this huge fight, and I went off the deep end. Even though Luke was there, I always tried to hide my frustration with my mom at the time, but I lost it. I went fucking crazy because my mom would gaslight me so bad into making me feel, and she has always done this, where I am the bad person. I was horrible. No matter what, dude. She would never take responsibility for any of the things that she had done in my life. And she had her little friends, who is so funny that she is not friends with any of these people anymore. My mom would become friends with people. She would tell them a version of what's happening. Right. And they would convince her that I'm this terrible person. I'm bad for her. She needs to kick me out. Wow. And so me and my son were kicked out a few days before Christmas. So, and at this point, I start living with my dad. My mom and I went a whole year without talking.
Wow.
Yeah. You know what? Living with my dad was, honest to God, one of the greatest things that I'd ever had had happen to me. My stepmom is...
You had stability.
I did. For the first time in my life, I had seen what a calm home looks like. I like want to cry thinking about it, but my stepmom, she stepped up for me as a mom. She, you know, her and I, our relationship's kind of funny like that. Like sometimes we'll go without talking, but whenever I go over there, her and I can talk for hours.
Right.
And she really is like a mom, dude. She's like your mom. She gives advice when it's necessary. She tells you that, like, I'm over here crying.
It's okay.
But it's a lot because I don't know, living with my stepmom and my dad, it was really amazing.
Right.
I wouldn't end up being there for very long, actually. We spent Christmas over there. We were there for the new year. Actually, by March, an old friend of mine who I'd gone hiking a lot with and when I'd first come home, her and I in early 2017 and in March, we moved in together. And we would actually live together for 3 years. And she is to this day, aside from you, one of the best roommates situations I've ever had. We got along really well. She actually made my breakup with Luke really easy because she was always there for me and we would hang out and
keep you busy.
Yeah. So Luke and I did end up breaking up, and it was not by any means a good breakup because he accused me of still being in love with Kyle.
Oh, fuck.
I denied it. I said, nope. I said, me and you are just so different. We can't be together anymore. And he would text me just long messages about how he was going to go do all these things that made me mad and be with this girl that he knew I was not a fan of. And I was just with it. When I was with him, I was very jealous because when I was with Kyle, he really taught me how to hate other women.
Oh, yeah.
I had no self-image at this point. I had no positive
Everybody loved him. Everybody wanted to be with him.
Every single person. So
she was hitting on me.
Yep. Every time.
Yeah.
And
bullshit.
Yeah. So being with this guy, I cannot say enough that he is a good guy. Luke is a very good person and I wish him the best. I think he has a girlfriend now that he's had steady for a few years.
Just wrong timing.
It was horrible timing and we're just not compatible for each other at all. And I don't know what kind of trauma I caused him, but dude, I am so sorry. I know that I was fucked up. I wholeheartedly blame myself for that. Yeah. So at this point, in 2017, I get this phone call and it's from Frank. Well, it was actually from Stacy first. Stacy had called me and said, hey, Frank wants to call you. Can he do that? And I was like, yeah, sure. You don't even have to ask.
Right. It's kind of a weird segue.
Yeah. So Frank calls me and he's slurring his words. So he's already been drinking.
Of course.
But he tells me that he talked to Kyle. He had not, until from my knowledge, he had not talked to Kyle. It was not uncommon for Frank to call me. He would call me and talk about him and Stacy's relationship sometimes. I don't know why, but
super weird.
Yeah, it was weird, but I don't know. Like, at this point, he really tried to treat me like a daughter, I guess, or at least what I thought maybe that's what it was. But basically, he would call me, and he called me this particular night and told me that he had talked to Kyle, and he believes that Kyle has changed. That Kyle is the same old Kyle that we used to know. And that when he comes home...
He's never been good.
Well, that's true. But at this point, I'm still very much like, I want to talk to Kyle. Right. I have these loose ends that I need tied up. I need closure.
Right. You never really broke up.
I never got the closure.
Yeah. Nope. He was ripped away from you. And then you just kind of felt like you had to break up with him, I guess, so to speak, because he wasn't physically there.
Exactly. So we're in this. So I'm talking to Frank, and because it's Frank and because I know how Frank felt, I, for some reason, believed him. I was like, okay, Frank says this is true. I guess, maybe it's true. And he's like, you should write him. I know he still has feelings for you. So what does my dumbass do? I immediately, as soon as we got off the phone, I wrote Kyle a letter. And I'm still in the cult at this point. And in the cult, basically, they have what are called mentors.
Oh, dear.
And so I didn't tell them that I was going to be writing until I had already sent the letter. And I was like, hey, I
can't stop me now.
Right. It was more of like a ask for forgiveness, not permission kind of a thing.
Right.
But they were always on board with me talking to Kyle. Is that not fucking crazy? They were always like, well, this is such a good opportunity that we can change him. We can turn him into a good guy. That's how they spun it. But it's because it would financially benefit them if they had more people around.
True.
We'll get into this cult thing later on. I'm really excited to talk about it because honestly, fuck them.
Literally.
But at this point, I'm still heavily involved. I think these people are my best friends.
Right.
And so I write Kyle. Kyle writes me back. We had to use his parents' address because I didn't want my parents knowing I had still lived with my parents at this point.
Yeah.
So once I got this letter back, his mom called me and was like, hey, you got a letter over here to his parents' address. And so I was actually going to be seeing them. So I drove out there, hung out with them for a weekend, and they gave me this letter, a letter that I did choose to wait to read. Well, actually, I ripped it open pretty much when I left,
right.
But I did wait until we were leaving, and I remember parking on the side of the road, just ripping it open and like reading it.
Right.
The emotions were all over the place because Kyle immediately started with his manipulation,
of course,
and trying to seem different. I think he knew that he needed to say the right things in order for this to work.
It had to be convincing.
Yeah, but he would tell me that he changed, and that if I still see him as the same person, then us talking is not even worth it. So I was like, oh, well, he must be telling the truth. So I wrote him a letter back, and I ended up getting my own place, and we would write back and forth to my address. And then eventually he would call me. We'd have our first phone conversation in a year or two, maybe.
Right.
And we would just continue talking. We talked every weekend for that entire year.
Wow.
So for all of 2017, we're like reconnecting and building this relationship again. And we eventually planned it to where I was going to be the one to pick him up from prison. Yeah.
Right, because he's about to get out at this point, right?
He's pretty close. He's a year out.
Okay.
So for this whole year, I've pretty much rebuilt my life. I have this really good job that my dad was actually proud of me for having, and still to this day is like, I can't believe you left that place. But I had this really good job. I had become friends with this young girl who started working there. She's still one of my really good friends, and shout out to you. You know who you are. She is incredible. I love her so much. She was like a little sister to me when I started working there. But I'm working at this place. I'm in my brand new apartment. I'm living my best life, honestly.
Right.
It really it was a lot. I rekindled this relationship with Kyle. One of the biggest things that I realized now was when I was talking to Kyle was a lot more comfortable talking about things that he would never talk about in the past. And these would later become huge red flags that I should have noticed immediately.
Right.
But he started talking to me about what subject topics that might make other people uncomfortable. So if you're my parent or somebody else's parents, maybe don't listen to this part, but it's really necessary for the story, because Kyle would start talking about these fetishes that he had, things that I just brushed apart, where I was like, okay, this is not,
it's not really appropriate.
It's not appropriate, but it's not that weird, because I mean, come on, let's be real. Let's all be honest with ourselves here. There are fetish communities. These are people who are engaging in these fetishes that are all consensual, and it's maybe weird to the average person, but they're out there, and we don't judge. We don't kink shame. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But
you do you, as long as you have consent.
Yes, but Kyle would bring up weird things that, again, would be very concerning.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go
Would he bring this stuff up while you guys were talking on the phone, or is it in letters still?
Both.
Okay.
Both. It was very, very like casual that he would bring it up. It would be like kind of, he would like hint at it, and then it would become much more apparent. And then when he felt like I was okay with the conversation, he would just blatantly say it. And basically he kind of alluded to the fact that he was really interested in younger looking girls. I do not look my age. I have never looked my age, to be honest. Even to this day, I get told that I look like I'm very young. Both of us do.
Right.
I think that was something that he was really interested in, and he would make remarks about the fact that I look younger. It got so weird. I'm not going to go into
such a creep.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into too many more details, but that's a very important detail for later on. We would continue this conversation until about March of 2018, when he was getting ready to come back from prison. So through this time, I don't really know much else what to add other than the fact that I was really just trying to get my life together. I had spent the first portion of Kyle's prison stay trying to get over him.
Right.
And then I would end up spending the last portion of his prison time. I would spend it trying to rekindle everything that I had with him. So it was a lot. So that kind of concludes part 2. I know this
will leave you on a little cliffhanger.
Yeah, this part's not it truly as exciting as the next part, but part 3 is kind of really where things get crazy.
Right.
Because that's when Kyle gets out of prison. So.
Yeah. We didn't want to get too much into it on this one, just because it's kind of an awkward time right now to like stop and then start a new segment. So we're just going to wait for part 3 on the rest of it.
Thank you so much for listening, you guys. We're so excited. Please share with your friends. Continue to listen and support us. Follow us where, Corey?
Follow us on Instagram. We usually try to post like a picture or something that kind of follows up with whatever we're talking about with the episode. So follow us on Instagram, and then we're available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Bye.
Bye.